Margaret Hale set the plate down in front of Eliza with a sound just barely too loud to be accidental. "You'll eat in the kitchen," she said, "like the help." Eliza looked at the plate. Scraps pushed to one side, a half-eaten biscuit left from someone else's breakfast. And then she looked up at Margaret. Not with fire, not with tears, just a long, steady look that made Margaret's chin lift a little higher, the way people do when they know they've crossed a line and refuse to admit it. Nathan was 3 feet away. He said nothing. That silence would cost him more than he understood yet. If that had happened to you, if you had traveled across hard country to marry a man you barely knew, carried everything you owned in a single worn bag, and been handed a stranger's leftovers on your first morning, what would you have done? Would you have walked out? Would you have wept? Eliza Voss did neither. She picked up the plate, carried it back to the kitchen herself, and started cooking breakfast for the entire ranch from scratch, because that was the kind of woman she was. And it would take this family far too long to understand what that meant. If this is the first time you found this channel, I want to ask you something before we go further. Hit that subscribe button right now, because the story of Eliza Voss and the Cole Ranch is the kind that doesn't let go of you, and I don't want you to miss a single chapter. Drop a comment and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if something in these first few minutes already got to you, leave a like. It means more than you know. Now, let's go back to where it really started. What? The stage came into Red Hollow on a Thursday, which was the worst possible day, because Thursday was market day, and every soul in town with nothing better to do was standing along the main street when Eliza Voss climbed down from the coach. She was the last one off. That wasn't shyness. The step was narrow, and the drop was further than it looked, and she needed both hands to manage it. And her hands were the kind that drew stares, so she had learned to take her time in public, to move deliberately, to give people their moment of looking before she gave them anything else to think about. The scars ran from the middle of her right palm up to the inside of her wrist, and on the left hand they went further, curling around 2 fingers that didn't bend quite right anymore. They were old scars, faded to a pale, rippled texture that looked in certain light like the surface of a river after a stone's been thrown in. She didn't hide them. She didn't flaunt them either. They were just part of her hands, the way a worn heel is part of a boot, evidence of use, evidence of having been somewhere difficult. Red Hollow noticed them immediately. She heard the shift in the ambient noise of the street, that particular drop in conversation that means everyone has decided to look at the same thing at the same time. She kept her eyes ahead and walked to the side of the stage to collect her bag. One bag, canvas, packed with the practiced efficiency of a woman who knew the difference between what she needed and what she wished she had. "That's her," someone said, not quietly enough. "The one Nathan Cole sent for." "Lord have mercy," said someone else. Eliza picked up her bag and turned to face the street. There were maybe 40 people visible from where she stood. Some of them looked away when she turned. Some didn't bother. An older woman in a green dress said something to the woman beside her behind a raised hand, and both of them watched Eliza with the clinical interest of people assessing livestock at auction. Eliza had grown up poor in a county where cruelty was considered a kind of honesty, so she recognized this. She understood it the way you understand weather. Not something to argue with, just something to know the shape of before you decided how to move through it. What she did not expect was the child. She was standing at the far edge of the boardwalk, maybe 7 years old, small for her age, wearing a dress that had been ironed with care but was slightly too large, the hem let down and still showing the old crease line. She was not staring at Eliza's hands. She was staring at Eliza's face, not with the town's calculating assessment, but with the particular blank intensity of a child trying to work something out. Eliza stopped. "You Lily Cole?" she said. The girl didn't answer for a moment, then she nodded very slightly. "I'm Eliza," she said. "I reckon you knew that already." Another pause, then, "Your bag's got a torn strap." Eliza looked down at it. The left strap had started pulling away from the canvas. She'd been meaning to fix it for 3 weeks. "You've got a good eye," she said. Lily said nothing else. She turned and walked back toward a wagon at the end of the street where a man was standing with his back to both of them, talking to another man in a cattleman's coat. He hadn't come to greet the stage. He had sent his daughter, apparently. Or his daughter had come on her own. Either way, it told Eliza something, and she filed it away. Nathan Cole turned when he heard the footsteps on the packed dirt behind him. He was taller than she'd imagined from the letters, which was not always a reliable measure of a man, but sometimes was. He had the kind of face that had probably been easier to read when he was younger. Broad, angular, with deep-set eyes the color of creek water after rain. Right now his expression had the careful neutrality of a man who was aware he was being assessed and didn't know quite how to feel about it. He took off his hat. That was something. "Miss Voss," he said. "Mr. Cole," she said. They stood there for a moment. The other man in the cattleman's coat drifted away with the tact of someone who had seen awkward things before and preferred not to witness them. "How was the journey?" Nathan asked. "Long," she said. "It had been 4 days. But I've had longer." He nodded. He glanced down. She saw it, the brief drop of his eyes to her hands. And then he looked back up fast, the way people did when they caught themselves. She didn't react. She had long since stopped expecting people not to look. What she watched for was what they did after. Nathan Cole picked up her bag. That was something too. "Wagons this way," he said, and started walking. Lily had already climbed up into the back without being asked, and was sitting with her knees pulled to her chest, looking at something in the middle distance that nobody else could see. Eliza climbed up to the bench seat. Nathan took the reins. They drove out of Red Hollow with the eyes of 40 people on their backs, and nobody said a word until the town was behind them and the road opened up into the long flat country that ran toward the Cole land. "The children know you're coming," Nathan said finally. "Lily you've met. Caleb he's 14. He'll be at the house." "All right," Eliza said. It's been a hard year." "I expect it has." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "My wife passed 18 months ago. Fever. Fast, it went fast, which I was told was a mercy." He said it the way men say things they've rehearsed, because someone told them they ought to say it, and they've been trying to work out how ever since. "I don't know if it was." "I don't think mercy and fast are always the same thing," Eliza said. He looked at her sideways. "No," he said after a moment. "I don't think so either." That was the first real thing they said to each other. It wasn't much, but it was real, which was more than Eliza had hoped for on a first wagon ride. The Cole Ranch came into view around a low hill about 40 minutes outside of town, and whatever she had imagined, the reality was something else. The main house was large, built in stages over what must have been 20 years, each addition visible in the change of the wood's color. There were outbuildings, a barn the size of a small church, corrals with horses moving slow in the afternoon heat, and beyond all of it, land that seemed to continue until it hit the sky. She had known Nathan Cole was a wealthy man. The letters had made that clear, in the careful, slightly embarrassed way that wealthy men sometimes mentioned their circumstances, as if they expected her to be impressed or suspicious or both. She was neither. She had not come for the land or the house or the money. She had come because a mutual acquaintance had described Nathan Cole as a decent man in a difficult situation, and Eliza had spent enough years in difficult situations to know that decent was rarer than it looked. The house, up close, told its own story. There were curtains in the downstairs windows that had been expensive once but were sun-faded now, unevenly. Somebody had been drawing them on one side more than the other. The kitchen garden off the east side of the house had gone partly to weeds. Though someone had made intermittent attempts to address it, you could see that from the haphazard pulling pattern. The front steps had a loose board, second from the top, and the handrail it was attached to had shifted out of plumb. A house that had been cared for, and then cared for less, and then kept up in the distracted way of people who have other things on their minds. She recognized it. She had lived in places like that. A woman was standing on the porch. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, dressed carefully in a dark blue dress that suggested she had put thought into this moment. Her hair was pinned up with more effort than the occasion seemed to warrant. She had the kind of face that had probably been warm once and was now arranged in an expression of welcome that didn't quite make it to her eyes. "Margaret," Nathan said, pulling the wagon up. "This is Eliza." "Mrs. Cole," Margaret said, and Eliza recognized the fraction of a pause before she said it, that tiny beat of a woman deciding whether she was going to say it at all. "Miss Voss is fine," Eliza said, climbing down before Nathan could come around to help. "For now." Margaret's expression shifted. Not much, but enough. "Of course," she said. Please, come in. I've made tea. Eliza followed her up the porch steps, feeling the loose board shift under her foot, and into the house. The interior was the house of a man who had built something for a woman he loved and then not known what to do with it after she was gone. There were good pieces of furniture, a sideboard, a rocking chair, a dining table long enough to seat 12. And they sat in rooms that should have been warm but somehow weren't. Not cold exactly. More like the warmth had been removed carefully, the way you pack something valuable away so it doesn't get damaged. As if keeping the house comfortable had started to feel, to someone, like a betrayal. Caleb was in the kitchen doorway. I was tall for 14, thin in the way boys are when they've grown fast and their shoulders haven't caught up yet. He had his father's coloring, but his jaw was set in a way Nathan's wasn't. Deliberately, consciously hard, the expression of a boy who had decided that emotions were a structural weakness and was testing whether he could live without them. He looked at her hands first. Then he looked at her face. "Hello," he said. The word had no inflection in it whatsoever. It was the verbal equivalent of a door that was neither open nor closed. "Hello," Eliza said in the same register. She moved past him into the kitchen and stopped. The kitchen was large, that's large enough to serve a household this size, with a proper range and good shelving and a work table that would have been generous in most homes. But the condition of it made something tighten in Eliza's chest. Not disgust, exactly, more like the particular ache of seeing something good that had been let go. The range needed a thorough cleaning. The shelves held supplies that were organized by someone who had understood where things ought to go, but not necessarily why. There were pots that were stacked wrong and would warp if they kept being heated that way. The work table had been scrubbed recently, but with the wrong kind of motion, across the grain instead of with it, and the wood had started to split along two of the joints. Margaret appeared in the doorway behind her. "I've managed the kitchen since Clara passed," she said. The name of Nathan's late wife dropped into the room the way Margaret clearly intended it to, as a weight, a reminder, a territorial marker. "And before that I helped considerably as well. Clara always appreciated my involvement." "I'm sure she did," Eliza said. "It's a demanding kitchen. The ranch hands eat here. During calving season there can be upward of 20 men." "I've cooked for more," Eliza said. Silence. "Tea's in the parlor," Margaret said, and her voice had dropped to a temperature that was still technically polite. Eliza turned and followed her out. The tea was good. Margaret had seen to that, whatever else she was doing. Eliza sat in the chair that was clearly not the best chair in the room, which Margaret had arranged without appearing to arrange. And she drank her tea and answered Nathan's careful questions about her journey and her previous experience without elaborating beyond what was asked. She knew what was happening. Margaret was watching her, cataloging, measuring the threat. Nathan was doing the particular kind of talking men do when they are nervous and don't know what they're nervous about. Lily sat in the corner of the room and didn't touch her tea. Caleb didn't come in at all. After 40 minutes, Nathan showed her to her room. It was small, at the end of the hall, with a window that faced the barn. Someone had put a quilt on the bed. It was one of the nicer quilts in the house, Eliza could see that, and she suspected it had been Nathan who put it there, though she wasn't certain. There was a nightstand with a candle and a small drawer that was empty. "It's not much," Nathan said from the doorway. "It's enough," she said. And she meant it. He nodded. He started to leave. Then he turned back. "Eliza," he said. It was the first time he'd used her first name. I know it's not what either of us might have wanted, exactly. This situation." He stopped. He was a man who had run a large operation for years and could make decisions quickly, but this was not the kind of thing that responded to that skill. "I want it to work," he said finally. "I want it to be decent. For the children, especially." She looked at him. "That's why I came," she said. He nodded once more and left. She sat on the edge of the bed for a while. Outside the window, one of the horses moved in the corral, and a ranch hand she hadn't met yet crossed the yard carrying something. The late afternoon light had turned the dry grass a shade of gold that was almost painful to look at. It was beautiful, this land. She hadn't let herself acknowledge that yet, but it was. She'd had beautiful things before. She'd had them taken away. She knew better than to start keeping score on the first day. She unpacked her bag. The iron pan went on the nightstand. She always kept it close, which people sometimes asked about and she never quite explained. The worn knife she wrapped back in its cloth and set at the bottom of the bag. The other things: 2 dresses, a change of underclothes, a needle and thread, a small tin of remedies she'd put together herself from plants she knew well. She arranged on the single shelf above the drawer. Then she sat back down on the bed and went through what she knew. Nathan Cole was a man who was trying. That was more than she'd had before, in some situations. He was not trying in the right direction yet, but the trying was there, underneath, and that was something to work with. Margaret Hale was a woman who had organized her entire identity around this family's need for her, and Eliza's presence was a direct threat to that identity. She would not become an ally easily, if ever. She needed to be understood more than she needed to be defeated. Caleb was a boy drowning in something he didn't have words for. And he had built a wall because walls are the only architecture that makes sense when you're 14 and grieving and nobody around you seems to be able to help. Lily was the one that worried her. Children who went quiet. Not shy, not reserved, but actually quiet. The way Lily was quiet. As if she had taken something essential and put it somewhere nobody could find it. Those children were harder to reach than the ones who fought. The ones who fought were still in the room. Lily had gone somewhere else, and she'd taken the door with her. Eliza lay back on the quilt and looked at the ceiling and thought about the fire. She thought about the fire sometimes when she was working out whether she had enough in her to do something hard. Not to punish herself, not out of anything as simple as that. More as a calibration. She had been in the burning kitchen, and she had made a choice about what to do, and her hands had paid for it, and she had kept going every day since. Whatever was in this house, whatever tangle of grief and resentment and loneliness had accumulated in these rooms over 18 months. It was not a burning kitchen. She could do this. She didn't sleep well. The bed was unfamiliar, the sounds of the ranch were new, and somewhere around midnight she heard footsteps in the hall that paused outside her door for a moment before moving on. She didn't know whose they were. She noted it and let it go. In the morning, she was up before the sun. She washed her face, dressed, and went to the kitchen. The range was cold. She got it going. She knew ranges. She had coaxed more bad ones to life than she could count. And she went to the shelves in the pantry and started understanding what she had to work with. Flour, cornmeal, dried beans, sides of salt pork, a good supply of potatoes, eggs from a hen house she could see from the kitchen window. Someone had smoked a ham recently and done it well. There were preserves, more than a dozen jars, apple butter and berry jam, and something that turned out to be pickled green tomatoes when she opened it. And they were good. Somebody in this house knew how to put up preserves. She made biscuits. She made a proper pot of cornmeal mush, thick enough to stick, which was what men who were going to do physical work all day actually needed. She put the salt pork on and let it render slow. She made coffee in the big pot because a ranch this size would need a big pot. And she made it strong because weak coffee is a form of dishonesty she had never seen the point of. By the time the first of the ranch hands came in, the kitchen smelled like something. There were 4 of them for the early meal. She'd learned their names over the next few days, and they came in with the careful wariness of men who didn't know what to expect from a new woman in the kitchen. They'd been fed by Margaret, she gathered, since Clara Cole had died. Margaret's cooking was competent, one of them had told another in a voice slightly too loud for the space, using the word competent in the tone that men use it when they mean fine, but not what we want. They sat down. She put the food in front of them. The first one to take a biscuit was a man with a beard going gray at the edges, who she would learn was named Walt. He bit into it. His expression did something involuntary, a brief loosening, like something easing out of a held position. He didn't say anything. None of them did. They ate. That was enough. For the first morning. Nathan came down while they were finishing. He stopped in the kitchen doorway with an expression of mild surprise that he tried to turn into something more neutral. He hadn't expected her to be in the kitchen this early. He hadn't expected any of this, she suspected. The food, the fire going, the ranch hands sitting quiet and eating instead of complaining about something. "You didn't have to start this morning," he said. "I know," she said, and handed him a cup of coffee. He drank it. His expression did the same thing Walt's had done, that involuntary easing. "It's good," he said. "It's just coffee," she said. "But it's made right." He looked at her for a moment. "Is there anything you need for the kitchen, or—" Anything. She had been making a list in her head since she'd surveyed the shelves. She told him what was on it. He listened, nodded twice, and said he'd have it brought from town. That was the first useful conversation they had. Margaret came down 20 minutes later and found Eliza cleaning the range. She stopped just inside the kitchen door. Her eyes moved over the cleared table, the empty plates, the stacked pots, the fire in the range. Eliza on her knees with a rag and a tin of stove black. "You should have waited," Margaret said. "I would have handled breakfast." "It's handled," Eliza said, without turning around. "I've been managing this kitchen for—" "I know," Eliza said. "I'll need you to show me where a few things are kept. The good stock pot, I couldn't find it." A pause. "It's in the back pantry," Margaret said stiffly, "on the low shelf." "Thank you," Eliza said. Another pause, and then the sound of Margaret's footsteps retreating. Eliza turned back to the range. Her hands ached. They always did in the early morning, the scar tissue stiffening in the cold before the day's warmth worked into it. And she flexed her fingers 3 times, the way she'd learned to, until the worst of it passed. Then she kept cleaning. She had not been in this house 24 hours, and she had already understood 3 things about what was going to be required of her here. The first was patience, more of it than she usually needed, and she already needed a considerable amount. The second was that Margaret Hale was going to be a daily negotiation, and the way to handle a daily negotiation was to never give it more than exactly what it required. The third, and this was the one she kept returning to as she worked through the morning, was Lily. She'd seen the child come down the stairs. She'd watched her stand in the kitchen doorway while the ranch hands were eating, and she'd watched the way Lily's eyes went to the food without her face changing, the way she'd tracked Eliza's movement around the kitchen with that same unreadable attention she'd shown in town. And then, without eating anything, without saying anything, she'd gone back upstairs. Eliza had noticed. She hadn't reacted. She was very good at noticing things without reacting, which was a skill she'd had to develop the hard way. But she thought about it all morning. A child who watches food but doesn't eat it is a child in a particular kind of pain. Not a physical one. Her color was reasonable. She moved without difficulty. But the kind of pain that has settled so deep, it started affecting the automatic things. The things a body does without being asked. That was going to take longer than biscuits. She was still working out the shape of it when Caleb appeared in the kitchen doorway after the noon meal. She hadn't seen him at breakfast. She'd left a plate covered on the counter, which he'd eaten at some point. The plate was empty and back on the stack when she looked. But he hadn't come in with anyone else. Now he stood in the doorway and watched her with those deliberate, measuring eyes. "You were up before 5, he said. "I was," she said. "Why?" "Because there was work to do." He thought about that. "Margaret usually does the kitchen." "I know." "She's not going to like you doing it." "Probably not," Eliza agreed. He was quiet for a moment. "What happened to your hands?" he said, and the way he asked it was interesting. Not cruel, not the bright, cruel curiosity of children who haven't learned shame yet, more careful than that. Like he'd been thinking about whether to ask and had decided that not asking was its own kind of rudeness. "Fire," she said. "When?" "Few years back." "How?" She looked at him. He met her eyes and she could see him expecting her to shut him down, the particular bracing of someone who asks questions and usually gets told that's none of their business. "I'll tell you sometime," she said. "Not today." He absorbed that. "That's not a no," he said. "No," she said. "It's not." He left. But he came back for supper, which was the first time he'd sat at the table with the others since she'd arrived, and she noticed that too, and didn't say anything about it. The days settled into a shape. Eliza cooked. She cleaned. She assessed everything in the house with the systematic attention of a woman who had learned to understand a situation before trying to change it. She repaired 2 things in the kitchen without mentioning them: the stacked pots, which she rearranged so they'd heat correctly, and the shelving bracket that had been slowly working its way loose and would eventually take the whole shelf down. She found the kitchen garden and spent an afternoon with it, not because she expected anyone to notice, but because gardens that can be saved should be. Walt, the ranch hand with the graying beard, brought his left hand to her on the 3rd day, 2 fingers swollen from a wire cut that had gone slightly wrong. She looked at it. She asked him a few questions. She went to her room and came back with the tin of remedies, and she cleaned the wound properly and packed it with a drawing poultice she'd made from things in the kitchen garden, and she wrapped it, and she told him what to watch for. He looked at her hands while she worked on his. She didn't stop him looking. "Fire," he said. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "My brother-in-law was a smithy," he said. "Got burned bad on his forearms. Said it hurt worse coming back than it did going in." "That's true," she said. "You're good at this," he said, meaning the wound. "I've had to be," she said. He left. 2 days later, he brought one of the other hands with a back that had been wrong for a month. She couldn't fix a bad back, she told him that plainly, but she could tell him what was actually wrong and what was making it worse, and she did, and he listened. Word moved through a group of men like water through rock. Slowly, but it got there. She was not warm to them exactly. She was not cold either. She was capable and direct, and she did not waste their time or her own, and she treated them like men who deserved straight information rather than management, and they responded to that the way people who are used to being managed always do when they encounter its absence. Nathan watched this. He didn't say much about it. He was a man who registered things internally and processed them at a pace she was still learning to read. But she caught him watching sometimes when he thought she wouldn't notice. That careful attention he brought to things he was trying to understand. He came to help her with the kitchen garden on a Saturday. She hadn't asked him to. He appeared with work gloves and didn't explain himself, and she handed him a hoe and showed him the section that needed breaking up, and they worked alongside each other for an hour without talking. "You don't push people," he said finally. "No," she said. "Most people push," he said, "when they want things." She pulled a root up that had gone deep. "Pushing things that aren't ready usually just damages them," she said. I was quiet for a while. Then, "Lily doesn't eat." "I know." "The doctor says he calls it grief, says she'll come out of it, but it's been months." His voice changed when he said it, went somewhere rougher, less managed. "She was eating before. She used to eat everything on her plate and ask for seconds and steal from Caleb's plate when he wasn't looking." He stopped. "I don't know what to do." Eliza drove the hoe into the dirt and leaned on the handle and looked at him. "She'll come," she said. "Not because we make her, just she'll come." "How do you know?" "I don't," she said honestly. "But she's watching. She watches everything. She watched those ranch hands eat breakfast every morning, and she watches you, and she watches me. She's not gone. She's just waiting for something to be safe enough." Nathan looked at his hands, his undamaged brown working man's hands. "Her mother used to make this apple cake," he said, "on Sundays. Lily used to help her. She'd stand on the stool and put the apples in the pan." He said it carefully, like it was something he hadn't let himself say out loud before, like saying it might break something. "Tell me how she made it," Eliza said. He looked up. "The cake," she said. "How did Clara make it?" He was very still for a moment, and then, slowly, haltingly, like a man working a door that had rusted shut, he started to tell her. He told her about the cake in pieces. Not all at once. Nathan Cole was not a man who gave things all at once. He parceled it out in the particular way of someone who has been holding something so long that releasing it, even a little, feels like a structural risk. The apples had to be Gravenstein's, he said. Clara had been firm about that. She said other apples went soft and wept and turned the whole thing to mush, and she had no patience for a filling that wept. She cooked them down first with a little brown sugar and a scrape of nutmeg. Not cinnamon, she thought cinnamon was lazy, which had made Nathan laugh the first time she said it because he hadn't known a person could have opinions about spices the way Clara had opinions about spices. He stopped himself there. Not because he'd said too much. Because he'd laughed a little, remembering it, and then the laugh had gone somewhere it hurt, the way a sound echoes in a room and comes back changed. Eliza waited. "She used to burn the edges," he said. "On purpose. She said the burned part was the best part. Lily believed her. She used to fight Caleb for the corner pieces." Eliza looked back at the garden. She drove the hoe in and turned the dirt. "All right," she said. "I'll need Gravenstein's, and you'll need to tell me where she kept the nutmeg." He went very quiet, then, "Third shelf, behind the cornmeal." She had already found the nutmeg. She knew where it was. But that wasn't the point, and he understood that after a moment, the way you understand something that has no words for it, that small act of being given a direction, a role, something useful to offer, when everything else has felt useless for a year and a half. He went back to work. They finished the garden row without talking again. That night, after supper had been cleared and the kitchen put to rights, Eliza made the apple cake. She made it with the Gravensteins Nathan had brought from the cold cellar without being asked, turning up with them in a bowl sometime that afternoon and setting them on the work table without comment. She cooked the apples down the way he'd described. Brown sugar, nutmeg, not too long, not too short, until they were tender but still had some structure to them. She made the crust the way she knew how, which was with cold butter worked in fast with her damaged fingers, which was harder than it used to be and slower, but she had found the way that worked for her particular hands, and she did it. She left the edges. She left them deliberately, pulling the crust up slightly loose at the corners so the filling caramelized against the pan and went dark, and just slightly bitter where the sugar caught. She put it on the counter to cool and went to bed. She did not call anyone to come see it. She did not mention it at breakfast. She left it there on the counter, covered with a cloth, the way Clara apparently used to leave things, the way a woman leaves something when she knows people will find it when they're ready. It was Lily who found it. Eliza was in the kitchen garden mid-morning when she heard the screen door. She didn't turn around. She kept working the hoe along the bean row, slow and steady. The screen door opened and did not close again. After a while, she heard it close. She waited until she'd finished the row, then went back inside. The cloth on the cake had been moved and replaced, not quite in the same position. Someone had taken a piece from the corner, the most burned corner, the one that had gone darkest. And the cut was small, careful, the cut of someone who was trying to take as little as possible while still taking something. Eliza looked at it for a moment. Then she covered it back up and went to get the laundry she'd been meaning to deal with all morning. She didn't tell Nathan. She didn't tell anyone. But something had started. She felt the weight of it, that particular quality of a thing that is still fragile but has at least begun. The fragile things in this house had a way of running into Margaret Hale. It happened on a Tuesday, the second week. Eliza had been in the house long enough to start making small adjustments. Not changes, not yet. Nothing that would read as an assertion of ownership, but corrections of the sort that a person with working knowledge of a kitchen makes naturally, without announcement. The pot arrangement. A shelf reorganized so the things used daily were in front. A repair to the window latch in the kitchen that had been letting cold air in at the wrong angle and making the range burn uneven on that side. Margaret had cataloged every one of these adjustments. Eliza knew this because Margaret had a way of standing in spaces that Eliza had recently altered, looking at them with an expression of careful non-reaction that was itself a reaction, the face of someone deciding how much to say. That Tuesday, Margaret decided to say it. Eliza was teaching herself the range's moods. Every range had moods, particular ways it ran hot or cool depending on the wood and the draft and the time of day. When Margaret came into the kitchen with the purposeful step of someone who had prepared this conversation. "I wanted to speak to you," Margaret said, "about the household accounts." "All right," Eliza said, without turning from the range. "Nathan has been having me manage them since Clara passed. I keep the ledger, I communicate with the merchants in town, I manage the dry goods ordering." She paused. "I wanted to make sure you understood that arrangement." "I understood Nathan to say he'd be having me take over the ordering," Eliza said. Her voice was level. "But I haven't had a chance to speak with him about it properly." "He may not have been thinking clearly when he said that," Margaret said. This has been a hard time for him. He doesn't always—" "I'll speak to him," Eliza said. "I think it would be better if—" "Margaret." Eliza turned from the range. She kept her voice even and her face steady, because this was not a moment to be angry. It was a moment to be clear, and those were different things. "I'm not going to manage this house through you. That's not how it's going to work. I don't mean that as an unkindness." Margaret's face did something complicated. "I have kept this family together," she said, and her voice had dropped to something rawer than she'd intended. "For 18 months, while he couldn't, I was here, every day. The children—" "I know," Eliza said. "I can see that. The children know you. This house is standing because of you." The rawness stayed in Margaret's face. It was fighting with the prepared version of this conversation she'd come in with, and losing. "That doesn't disappear because I'm here," Eliza said. I'm not trying to erase what you did. Then why does it feel like you're replacing it? Eliza held her eyes. Because something's changing, she said. That's different from erasing. A long pause. The range popped and hissed. Outside, someone crossed the yard, boots on packed earth. I don't trust you, Margaret said. Not cruel, just honest, the way things come out when a person's more hurt than they meant to show. I know that too, Eliza said. You don't need to yet. Margaret left. She didn't slam the door. That was something, Eliza supposed. The restraint required not to slam it was its own kind of concession. She turned back to the range and stood there for a moment, her hands braced on the work table, running through the conversation the way she always ran through difficult things. Not to find what she'd done wrong, but to find what was actually happening underneath the words. Margaret wasn't wrong about what she'd built here. She had kept this household together through something devastating, and she had done it without acknowledgement, without thanks, and probably without adequate sleep, and now a stranger had walked in and started moving the pots around. What Eliza had to find was a way to let Margaret keep something real, not a consolation, not a charity, but something that was actually hers, without letting her keep control of things that couldn't be controlled by the wrong person. She didn't have the answer yet. She was still working on it when Nathan found her that evening. He came into the kitchen after supper when the house had gone quiet and Eliza was doing the last of the washing up. He looked like a man who had been told something and was trying to decide what to do with it. Margaret spoke to me, he said. I expected she would. She says you told her she wasn't needed. Eliza turned and looked at him. That is not what I said. He held her look. He was doing the thing men sometimes did, running a version of the conversation against what he knew of the people involved, trying to find the shape of the truth. I told her I wasn't going to manage this house through her, Eliza said, and I told her what she'd done for this family hadn't disappeared. Those were the two things I said. Nathan was quiet. She's been running this household, Eliza said, and she's been good at parts of it, but she's also been making decisions that aren't hers to make, and not making ones that are, because nobody's told her where the lines are. That's not her fault. It's a hard situation to be in without clear lines. He ran his hand across his jaw. He had the look of a man who avoided household conflict the way some men avoided debt. Not out of cowardice exactly, more out of a conviction that if he didn't address it directly, it would eventually solve itself. It was the same instinct that had let the kitchen fall into its previous state, and the garden, and probably half a dozen other things she hadn't gotten to yet. What do you need from me? He said. She appreciated that. He could have defended Margaret. He could have said he'd handle it and then not handled it. Instead, he asked, Tell her plainly what her role is, Eliza said. Don't leave it for her to negotiate with me. That's not a fight she should have to have with me. That's a conversation she should have with you. He nodded. Slowly, but he nodded. And Nathan, she said. He looked at her. She loves those children. Whatever else is complicated, that's real. I know, he said. I know. He left to find Margaret. Eliza finished the washing up and went out to the porch and stood in the dark for a while, listening to the sounds the ranch made at night. The horses settling, the distant low of cattle, a barn owl somewhere in the trees past the corral. She had not been this tired in a long time. Not physically. The work didn't tire her. She was built for work. But the particular tiredness of having to read every room, every face, every silence, of being the new thing in a place that was still deciding whether to accept or reject her. She flexed her hands in the dark. The ache was predictable now, something she'd mapped and accounted for. Left hand worse in cold, right hand worse, when she'd been doing fine work. She'd learned over the years to work around the bad days without stopping and to push through the medium days without pretending they weren't medium. She heard the screen door behind her and tensed slightly, expecting Margaret or Nathan. It was Caleb. He came out and stood at the far end of the porch, leaning on the rail with his back to her. He'd been doing that, coming to spaces she occupied and inhabiting the far edge of them, like a cat deciding whether a room was safe. She let him stand there. Didn't push. She's been up there for 2 hours, he said finally. She knew he meant Lily. She sleep? I don't know. She gets like that. She just stays in there. Eliza looked out at the dark yard. What did she used to do, in the evenings? Caleb thought about it. She used to follow my ma around, everywhere, just follow her and talk. About nothing. She could talk for an hour about one chicken in the yard. Something shifted in his voice, a softening he wasn't quite able to stop. I used to tell her to be quiet. I used to say I couldn't hear myself think. He stopped. You didn't know, Eliza said. I knew she was annoying, he said. The self-directed bitterness in it was more adult than a 14-year-old should have to carry. That's different from what you're thinking you knew, Eliza said. You were her brother, not her. You were supposed to tell her to be quiet. That's what brothers do. He was quiet for a while. She tried to talk to me, he said, after Ma died. For about 2 weeks she kept coming to me, and He stopped again. I just couldn't. I couldn't listen to anyone talking. Does she still come to you? No, he said. Very flat. She stopped. Eliza looked at the side of his face. In the low light, he looked younger than 14 and older. You could go knock on her door, she said. She probably won't answer. Probably not the first time. He turned to look at her. You think it's that simple? No, she said. I think it's that hard. Knocking when you don't know if anyone's going to answer is one of the hardest things there is. He looked back out at the yard. She waited for him to argue or dismiss it, which he didn't. Maybe, he said. He went back inside after a while. She stayed on the porch until the cold got serious, and then she went in too. She heard footsteps on the stairs, heavier than Lily's, Caleb's step. She'd learned to read them by now, going up to the second floor. Then, after a long pause, a quiet knock. She didn't hear a response, but she also didn't hear the footsteps come back down. She went to bed. The complication she hadn't anticipated arrived in the form of a man named Gerald Pratt. He came on a Friday afternoon, riding in from the Eastern Road in the way of a man who had calculated the timing to make himself difficult to turn away, close enough to supper, that refusing him would be a statement, far enough from dark that leaving immediately was still plausible. He was a land agent, or he called himself that. He had a face that would have been considered pleasant if you weren't paying attention. The kind of face that was designed to seem open and guileless, which is different from actually being those things. He was maybe 50, well-dressed for the territory, with boots that hadn't done much walking in them. Nathan met him at the door. Eliza was in the kitchen and could hear the voices in the hall, not the words, just the register and rhythm of the exchange. Nathan's careful and neutral, Pratt's easy and warm, in the performed way of a man who practices warmth. They went into the study. Walt appeared in the kitchen doorway 10 minutes later, his expression the particular flatness that faces go when a man wants to say something and is working out whether he should. Pratt here? Eliza said. Walt looked at her, slightly surprised she knew the name. She'd heard it once, from one of the other hands, mentioned in passing the way you mention a sore spot you're careful around. What do you know about him? She said. Walt came in and sat down at the kitchen table. He picked up his coffee cup and turned it in his hands. He's been working this part of the territory for 2 years, he said. Comes in, looks at land, makes offers. Some people have sold. And? And some of those people wished they hadn't after. He set the cup down. There's a family name of Briggs, 20 miles east. Sold Pratt a third of their grazing land 2 years ago, after he told them the water rights had a flaw he could prove in court. Took them 6 months to find out the flaw didn't exist. By then the money was spent, and the land was gone. Eliza turned back to the stove. Does Nathan know this? I don't know what Nathan knows, Walt said. He's had other things to think about. Since Mrs. Cole. She put a lid on the pot and turned the heat down and went to the hallway. The study door was closed. She could hear Pratt's voice clearly now, confident and flowing. The voice of a man who had talked people out of things many times and knew the rhythm of it. She knocked. A pause. Then Nathan's voice. Come in. She opened the door and looked at both of them. Pratt turned in his chair with the smooth curiosity of a man who liked to know what had just walked into a room. His eyes dropped to her hands for a beat. Fast, professional, the assessment of a man who noted everything. And then came back to her face with a smile. Didn't know you had company, she said to Nathan. I'll hold supper 30 minutes if you need it. That's fine, Nathan said. He was holding some papers she hadn't seen before. His expression was careful in a way it sometimes wasn't. Gerald Pratt, said the man, turning fully in his chair, making it a social event. And you'd be the new Mrs. Cole. I'd be Eliza, she said. A pleasure. His smile didn't shift. That was the tell, actually. A smile that doesn't respond to what the other person says, that stays in its original shape, is a smile that was designed somewhere else and applied. She looked at Nathan. 30 minutes. Thank you, he said. She closed the door. She went back to the kitchen and stood at the stove and thought about the papers in Nathan's hands. She hadn't been able to read them, but she'd seen the layout. Columns, signatures, the particular format of a legal document or something designed to resemble one. She thought about what Walt had said. She thought about Pratt's boots. Supper was on the table in 30 minutes. Pratt stayed and ate, because of course he did, and he was excellent company at the table. Funny in a broad, easy way, the kind of funny that makes groups of people feel included rather than targeted, which is its own skill even when it's being used for the wrong thing. He complimented the meal twice. The second time he looked directly at Eliza and said, "You know, Mrs. Cole, Nathan is a lucky man." And it was the kind of compliment that isn't actually about the food, the kind that's staking something. "The credit goes to what's in the pantry," Eliza said. "Nathan stocks it well." Nathan glanced at her. Something registered behind his eyes. Pratt left after supper with the papers under his arm. Not signed, not yet, but not refused either. Eliza watched him ride out from the kitchen window, and she turned the shape of it over in her mind. She waited until the children were upstairs before she went to find Nathan. He was in the study, sitting at his desk with the lamp lit, looking at nothing in particular. "Tell me about the papers," she said. He looked up. A flicker of something. Not defensiveness, more like the expression of a man who's been caught in the middle of his own doubt. "It's a land proposal," he said. "He wants to buy the eastern grazing section, 1,500 acres. "What does he say it's worth?" Nathan named a figure. She held it up in her mind against what she'd gathered about the territory, the land, the current cattle prices, the water on that section. "It's low," she said. "He says the eastern water access is what?" she said. He stopped. "Walt tells me Pratt has a habit of finding legal flaws in water rights that later turn out not to exist," she said. "The Briggs family." Nathan was very still. "Did you know about the Briggs?" she said. "I'd heard something," he said slowly. "I hadn't—" He stopped again. He looked like a man in the particular discomfort of someone who had heard a warning and filed it under things he'd deal with later, and had now been brought up against the cost of that. "I'm not telling you what to do with your land," Eliza said. "That's yours. I have no standing there. You're my wife." "I'm your wife and I have no standing to tell you what to do with 1,500 acres, she said. "I'm just telling you to have someone else look at those papers before you sign them. Someone who isn't Pratt and isn't working for Pratt." He held her eyes for a long moment. "There's a lawyer in Mill Haven," she said. 40 miles east, worth the ride." "You know a lawyer in Mill Haven." "I know of one," she said. "His name's Deakins. He's supposed to be honest. Worth finding out if he is." Nathan sat back in his chair. He looked at the desk, and then at his hands, and then at her. "Why do you know this?" he said. Not accusatory, genuinely asking, the way a man asks when he's realizing he knows less about a person than he thought. "Because I've been poor," she said. "Poor people have to know who's honest and who isn't. Rich people get to find out the slow way." He looked at her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his face. Some held thing that had been there since she arrived, some particular tension in the way he'd been managing the situation of her and the household and everything that had accumulated in the 18 months before she came. "All right," he said, "I'll ride to Millhaven." She nodded and went back to the kitchen. She sat down at the work table and pressed her hands flat against the wood, feeling the grain of it, the slight roughness, the way the wood had been shaped by years of use into something that held its history in the texture. She was tired in a way she hadn't quite accounted for. Not the work. She had said that before and it was still true. The work didn't tire her. But the constant measuring of things, the watching, the careful calibration of when to speak and when to hold back and when to step in through a door that nobody had opened for her. She had been in this house less than 3 weeks. It felt like she'd been here for a year. It also felt strangely and quietly and in a way she wasn't ready to say out loud, like something she wasn't ready to leave. That was dangerous, maybe. She had learned not to want things too fast. Wanting things fast was how you got hurt in ways that didn't heal clean. But the kitchen was hers now, in the way kitchens become yours. Not by ownership, but by the particular intimacy of a space where you have stood at 3 in the morning and held your own counsel. The garden was starting to come back. Walt and the other hands nodded at her now, without the wariness. Caleb was not open, but he was present, which was not nothing. And Lily. Lily had eaten the apple cake. 3 times now, she had come down in the early morning before anyone else was awake. Eliza knew because she got up early, earlier than she let on, and taken a piece from the corner. Each time the cut was slightly less careful, slightly less like someone trying to take as little as possible. The 3rd time, it had been a real slice, a hungry person's slice. Eliza had gone out to the kitchen garden and stood in the cold morning air with her damaged hands at her sides, and felt something she didn't quite have a name for. Not triumph, not relief. Something quieter and more complicated. The feeling of a door that hadn't opened yet but had, for the first time, shifted slightly on its hinge. She got up from the work table and banked the stove for the night. She checked the doors, the way she always did last thing. Not out of fear, just habit, the last act of a woman who had learned that caring for a space meant accounting for it fully, all the way to the end of the day. She went to her room. And in the morning she was up before the sun, and the range was going, and the coffee was strong. And when the screen door opened at 6:15 and a small pair of feet came down the hall and paused at the kitchen doorway, Eliza did not turn around. She kept working. And the feet came in. And Lily Cole sat down at the kitchen table, not the corner, not the edge, the table itself, and didn't say anything. Eliza kept working. After a while, she put a biscuit on a plate and set it on the table without comment and went back to the stove. She heard the sound of the biscuit being picked up. She kept her face forward and her hands moving and her breathing steady, the way you stay still when something wild and frightened has come close, because you know that the slightest wrong motion will end it. "Can I watch?" Lily said. Her voice was rusty from disuse, small and uncertain. "Sure," Eliza said. Just that. No excitement, no making it large, no giving the moment more weight than it could hold. She heard the chair scrape, and Lily came to stand beside her at the stove. Her head came up to about Eliza's shoulder. She smelled like sleep and the particular dusty sweetness of children who are between baths. She watched Eliza's hands on the pan, the scarred hands, working the way they worked, adapted and efficient and not quite right and entirely functional. And she didn't say anything about them. "What are you making?" she said. "Gravy," Eliza said, "for the biscuits." "My mom made gravy," Lily said. "I know," Eliza said. "Your pa told me." A pause. "Did he tell you how?" "No," Eliza said. "But do you know how she made it?" Lily thought about it, really thought about it, the careful inward concentration of a child accessing something precious. "She put bacon in first," she said, "and she let it get crispy, and then she put flour in the fat." "That's the right way," Eliza said. "I did the same thing." Lily watched the pan. "Is it going to be the same?" she said. Eliza turned and looked at her. The girl was looking at the pan, not at her, but the question was the realest thing anyone in this house had said to her. "No," Eliza said honestly. "It won't be the same. Mine's different. It might be good in its own way, but it won't be the same." Lily looked up. Her eyes were very dark, too serious for her face, carrying something too large for a 7-year-old to be carrying. "Okay," she said, and she stayed. Lily stayed for the gravy, and then she stayed for the biscuits coming out of the oven, and then she stayed while Eliza portioned everything out for the ranch hand's breakfast. And somewhere in the middle of all that staying, she stopped being a visitor in the kitchen and started being a presence in it, small and quiet and watchful, but present in the way that mattered, the way a room is different when someone is in it versus when it's empty. She didn't eat much that first morning. A biscuit and some gravy, which was more than she'd eaten at the table in weeks, according to what Nathan had told Eliza in fragments across various conversations. But she sat at the table while the ranch hands came through, and she watched them eat, and once, just once, when Walt said something mildly ridiculous about the weather, she made a sound that was almost a laugh. Walt pretended not to notice. Eliza had told him nothing. He was simply a man who had been around enough difficult things to know when delicacy was required, and he extended it without being asked. After the hands cleared out, Lily helped Eliza carry the plates to the wash basin. She didn't offer, she just started doing it, picking up one plate at a time with the careful deliberateness of someone who was used to being told they were too small to help and was preemptively demonstrating otherwise. "I won't break them," she said when Eliza glanced at her. "I know," Eliza said. "Margaret always watches me like I'm going to break things." "Margaret worries," Eliza said. It was the most neutral, true thing she could find. Lily set a plate in the basin. "She worries about everything," she said. "She worries about the floors getting wet and the curtains getting sun-faded and Caleb's boots making tracks." She paused, considering. She didn't used to worry so much before. Eliza washed a plate and set it to dry. "People change after they lose something," she said. Lily was quiet for a moment. "Did you lose something?" she said. "Before you came here." It was the directness of children, not cruel, just unmediated, the question going straight to the thing without the detour adults make around it. "Yes," Eliza said. "What?" "Quite a few things," Eliza said. "Over quite a few years." Lily absorbed this with the seriousness she brought to everything. "Did it get better?" she said. Eliza thought about the honest answer, which was not simple. "It got different," she said finally. "Different isn't always better right away, but it makes room for better later on if you stay in it long enough." Lily picked up another plate. She thought about that for a while. "Caleb knocked on my door last night," she said. Eliza said nothing. "He didn't say anything. He just knocked and then sat down on the floor in the hall outside my door." A pause. "I could see the shadow of his feet under the door." "Did you open it?" Eliza said. "No," Lily said, "but I moved my candle to the floor so he could see mine too." She was quiet. We sat there for a while. Then he went to bed. Eliza kept washing. She did not let her face do what it wanted to do. "That sounds about right," she said. Lily set the last plate in the basin and dried her hands on the cloth Eliza kept on the hook by the basin, precisely where Eliza had hung it, and went upstairs. Eliza stood at the wash basin and finished the plates and looked at the kitchen garden through the window and thought that she had been in this house less than a month, and it was already costing her more than she'd budgeted for, emotionally speaking. Not in a bad way. In the way that things cost you when they start to matter. She had not planned to let it matter this fast. That plan, like most of her plans when she examined them honestly, had been optimistic. Nathan came back from Millhaven on a Thursday, 2 days after he'd left, riding in at midday with the particular posture of a man who has had a journey that confirmed something he didn't entirely want confirmed. Eliza was in the kitchen garden when she saw him ride in. She finished the row she was on, washed her hands at the pump, and went inside. He was in the study with the papers spread on the desk. The lamp was lit even though it was midday, which meant he'd been sitting there a while and hadn't thought to adjust. "Deacons look at them?" she said from the doorway. "For 3 hours," Nathan said. "I was looking at the papers but not reading them." He found 4 problems. Not with the water rights. Pratt's claim about the water rights was fabricated, same as with the Briggs land. But 4 other things. The boundary description on page 3 references a survey marker that doesn't exist. The indemnity clause in the back would have let Pratt sue me for anything that went wrong with the land after sale, including things I had nothing to do with. The payment structure had a lien provision buried in the language on page 7 that would have put a claim on the northern pasture as collateral. He stopped. And the price was less than half what Deacons thinks the land is worth. Eliza came in and sat down in the chair across the desk. "What are you going to do?" she said. "I'm not signing," he said, which she had assumed. "But Pratt's going to come back. He doesn't take no from the first refusal. Deacons told me that too. He comes back with a revised offer and a better reason, and he keeps coming until people sign or he finds something else to use." "What else does he have to use?" she said. Nathan was quiet for a moment. The lamp flickered. Outside, someone was working in the yard, the rhythmic sound of a post being driven into the ground. "There's a tax question," he said, "on the eastern section. My father acquired it in a way that it wasn't clean, not illegal exactly, but the paperwork was done in a hurry, and there are gaps. Deacon says it's probably fine, but if someone with resources and bad intentions wanted to challenge it, they could make my life difficult for a year or 2 while it sorted itself out. And Pratt knows about the gaps." "Apparently." He finally looked up from the papers. "I don't know how." But Deacon says Pratt has a clerk who specializes in county records, and he works that angle before he ever shows up with an offer. He knows the weaknesses before he knocks on the door. Eliza thought about this. She thought about the boots and the timing of the visit and the way Pratt had looked at the house and the yard and calculated everything there was to calculate. "Get ahead of the paperwork," she said. "Whatever's missing from your father's acquisition, fill it in now, before Pratt has a chance to use it. Deacons can help with that. It'll take time." "Less time than a legal fight," she said. He rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture she'd seen him make when he was tired, really tired, the bone-deep kind that comes from carrying something too long without being able to put it down. "I didn't think about any of this," he said. "When I was in the last year, I just didn't think about it. I let things go." "You had other things happening," she said. "That's not an excuse." "I didn't say it was an excuse," she said. "I said you had other things happening. Those are different." He looked at her across the desk. In the lamplight, he looked older than he did outdoors. Not in a bad way, more in the way that certain faces are more themselves in low light, the surface worn off, and the actual shape of the person visible underneath. "You do that," he said. "Do what?" "Make the distinction," he said, "between what's an excuse and what's just true. Most people don't bother. They either give you the excuse or they blame you for the thing." She didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything. "I'll go back to Deacon's," he said. "Get the paperwork sorted." He gathered the papers into a stack, the movement of a man returning to the practical because the other kind of conversation had reached its limit. "Thank you," he said, "for telling me about him." "You would have found out," she said. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not in time." She left him to it and went back to the kitchen. The days were getting shorter. The air in the morning had a bite to it now that hadn't been there when she arrived, the first edge of the season turning. She started making the heartier things, the long-cooked stews and the bean soups and the cornbread that the hands ate 4 pieces of each. And the kitchen was warmer and it smelled different, and the house, she noticed, had started to feel different too. Not fixed, not resolved, but inhabited in a way it apparently hadn't been for a while. She heard Nathan laugh one evening, a real laugh, surprised out of him by something Caleb said at the supper table. And she saw how the sound landed on all of them, how everyone's face shifted slightly, like people who had been sitting in a dark room and someone had let in a crack of light without warning. She also noticed that Margaret watched her more carefully now, and in a different way. The open hostility had receded, not because anything had been resolved between them, more because Nathan's conversation with her had established something. Boundaries were not the same as warmth, but they were something to work from. What replaced the hostility was harder to read. It was something more complicated, more searching, as if Margaret was reassessing the situation and wasn't sure what to do with what she was finding. It came to a head, in a quiet way, on a Tuesday afternoon. Eliza was making the preserve she'd been planning since she'd gotten the kitchen garden producing properly again. A green tomato relish that was better than it sounded and would see them through winter. And Margaret came in and stood at the kitchen door the way she'd done 100 times, but this time she didn't come with an agenda that Eliza could feel from across the room. She just stood there. "Can I help?" she said. The words came out slightly strangled, like they'd had to fight their way through something to get said. Eliza looked at her. She took the measure of what it had cost Margaret to say that. Because it had cost something, she could see that. "Jars need sterilizing," she said. "There's a pot on the second shelf, the big one. Fill it about halfway." Margaret went and got the pot. They worked in silence for a while. Not a bad silence, the kind that forms when 2 people are doing something together and haven't found their footing yet, but haven't fallen either. "Clara used to do green tomato relish," Margaret said eventually. Her voice was careful. "Nathan mentioned she put up preserves," Eliza said. "I found the jars from last year. She knew what she was doing." "She was an excellent cook," Margaret said. Then carefully, "Not everything I said about you was fair." Eliza kept stirring. "Not everything I said about you was fair either," she said. Margaret looked up. "I told you I wasn't going to manage this house through you," Eliza said. "And that's true, I'm not. But I said it like your involvement was the problem. It wasn't. The lack of clarity was the problem." Margaret was quiet. "Nathan should have said more sooner," Eliza said. "To both of us." "He doesn't manage conflict well," Margaret said. There was a tartness to it that was, Eliza realized, the first thing Margaret had said that was honest without being defensive. He never has. Claire used to say he could manage 300 head of cattle through a storm, but put two women in a room with a disagreement, and he'd find urgent business in the east pasture. Something shifted between them. It wasn't warmth yet, but it was the first thing that had the possibility of warmth in it. "She sounds like she was something," Eliza said. "She was," Margaret said. "She wasn't. She wasn't perfect. She had a temper. She held grudges longer than was sensible. She could be stubborn about the most ridiculous things." She stopped. Her hands kept working on the jars. "She was my sister-in-law for 16 years. I knew her better than I knew most people." A pause. "I miss her in ways I didn't expect. Ways that catch me." "That's how it works," Eliza said. "The ones that catch you are the worst." "Yes," Margaret said quietly. They finished the relish. Margaret helped put it up, working the jars with competent hands, and when it was done and the counter was cleaned, she stood there for a moment as if she wasn't sure what to do with what the afternoon had become. "I'm not leaving," Eliza said. "I want you to know that. I know that's probably been a worry." Margaret's face did something complicated. "It had crossed my mind," she said. "I came here because I wanted to be here," Eliza said. "Not because I had nowhere else to go. I want to make that work. But it's going to take all of us." Margaret looked at her. For the first time, the looking was something like seeing. "All right," she said, and she left. Eliza leaned against the work table and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for the better part of a month. She was still standing there when Lily appeared in the doorway. "Is she being nicer?" Lily said. "Lily, I'm just asking." "People are complicated," Eliza said. She's doing the best she can." Lily came into the kitchen and climbed onto the stool at the work table. The stool she had apparently claimed over the past 2 weeks as her observation post, the place from which she watched Eliza cook with the serious attention of someone studying something they want to learn. "Caleb says Nathan might know somebody who wants to hurt the ranch," she said. The way she said it was careful, the deliberateness of a child who has heard something she wasn't supposed to hear and is deciding how to handle what it means. Eliza looked at her. "Where did you hear that?" "Caleb was talking to Walt," she said. "I wasn't listening on purpose. I was in the barn." "The barn happens to be a very good place to hear conversations that happen near it," Eliza said. "Yes," Lily agreed without apology. Eliza wiped down the counter that didn't need wiping down because she needed something to do with her hands while she thought about how to answer. "There's a man who's been trying to buy some of the land," she said. "Your pa isn't going to sell it, but the man might not like that." "What will he do?" "I don't know yet," Eliza said. "But your pa knows about it now, and he's dealing with it. That's his job." "What's your job?" Lily said. Eliza turned and looked at her. The question was genuine, the searching directness of a child trying to understand the architecture of her own household. "Right now," Eliza said, "getting supper on." Lily looked at her for a moment, and then, in the particular way she had of accepting answers that weren't complete but were at least honest, she got off the stool and went to the shelf and got down the mixing bowl without being asked. The feast had been announced the first week of Eliza's arrival, though nobody had told her about it directly. She'd found out the way she found out most things in the Cole household, sideways, through fragments. Walt mentioned it to one of the other hands while she was in earshot. Nathan said something to Caleb about the pasture needing to be in good shape by the end of the month. Margaret mentioned to no one in particular that she would need to account for linens. It was the annual gathering that the Cole Ranch hosted for the surrounding families and workers. A tradition going back to Nathan's father, the kind of event that in this part of the territory functioned as both a social occasion and a statement. The Cole Ranch was the largest and most established in the region, and the feast was, among other things, a demonstration of that fact. People came from 20, 30 miles out. There were sometimes 60 guests, sometimes more. Clara Cole had run it every year for 15 years. Eliza understood without being told that this year, the first year without Clara, the feast was going to be watched very carefully by everyone who attended. She also understood, before anyone said a word to her about it, exactly what Margaret intended. It became clear on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks before the date, when Margaret appeared at breakfast with a list. It was a thorough list. Margaret was thorough. It covered the menu in precise detail: dishes, portions, timing, service. and it assigned the kitchen work entirely to Margaret and to two women she intended to bring in from town to help. Eliza's name appeared on the list once, at the bottom, next to the words bread and biscuits. Margaret set the list on the table at breakfast and talked through it with Nathan, who listened with the expression of a man who found domestic logistics somewhat beyond his capacity to engage with fully at 7 in the morning. Eliza read it while Margaret talked. She noted the bread and biscuits line. She noted the rest. She set the list down and drank her coffee. She said nothing. Nathan looked at her once, across the table, with a slightly uncertain quality to his look, as if he was trying to determine what her silence meant. She gave him nothing to read. She would deal with this, but not at the breakfast table. She let 3 days go by. She spent those 3 days cooking for the household as usual, learning the rhythm of the ranch's daily demands with the systematic patience she brought to everything, and she spent them thinking. She was not naive about what was happening. Margaret had come as far as she'd come. One afternoon making relish together, one honest conversation. And then she had retreated to the one place she had left to defend. The feast was Margaret's territory, had been for 16 years under Clara, and she was going to hold it. Eliza understood the impulse. She didn't agree with the execution. She went to Nathan 4 days after the list appeared. He was at the corral, watching one of the hands work a young horse. She stood at the fence beside him and watched with him for a while. He knew she hadn't come to watch the horse. "The feast," she said. "Eliza, I'm not asking you to fight Margaret about it," she said. "I'm asking you to think about what it's going to look like." He was quiet. "You've been absent for 18 months, she said. "I don't mean that harshly. I mean, people know it. The people coming to this feast have watched the Cole Ranch from a distance and they've been wondering about it. And now you have a new wife, and there's a question about what that means." She turned to look at him. "If I'm in the kitchen making bread and biscuits while Margaret runs the feast, that question gets answered in a particular way." He watched the horse. "What do you want?" he said. "I want to run the kitchen," she said. "The whole thing. Margaret can be part of it. She knows things I don't know about how this feast has been done, and I want that knowledge. But it needs to be mine to run." "She's not going to like it." "No," Eliza said. "She's not." He was quiet for a long moment. The horse moved in a circle, the hand guiding it with a steady hand and no sudden movements. "You know what you're doing?" he said. "With food that many people?" "Yes," she said, without qualification. He looked at her. He had learned over these weeks to hear the difference between her confidence and her uncertainty, because she was honest about both. This was not uncertainty. "All right," he said. The conversation with Margaret went the way Eliza had expected it to go, and also, in one key way, differently. The expected part was the first 5 minutes, which were tightly controlled fury. Margaret's voice even, and her words careful, and her face the face of a woman who had calculated that becoming visibly angry would cost her more than she could afford. The different part was what happened after. Eliza had made a deliberate choice about how to walk into that conversation, and the choice was this. She was not going to take the feast from Margaret. She was going to bring Margaret into it. "I need you," she said, when Margaret's controlled fury had run its course. "I mean that, actually. I don't know how this feast has worked for 15 years. I don't know the families, which ones have dietary needs, which ones have feuds with which others, which dishes Clara made that people have been looking forward to all year. You know all of that." Margaret held herself very still. "I can run a kitchen," Eliza said. "I can do that, but I can't do it for this event without you, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise to win an argument." Something shifted in Margaret's face, very slightly. The tightness around her eyes changed quality. Still wary, but something underneath had heard what Eliza said and was working on it. "The Hadley family," Margaret said, slowly and carefully, as if she was testing the ground before she put her weight on it, "cannot eat onions, any of them. Clara always made a separate gravy." "Tell me what else," Eliza said, and Margaret told her. They sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours, and Margaret talked, and Eliza listened and took notes in her own shorthand on a piece of paper. And what came out of it was not just a menu, but a map of 20 years of relationships and preferences and small, meaningful details that could not have been learned any other way. Margaret knew where the extra lanterns were stored. She knew which of the neighboring ranchers would arrive early and need to be occupied so they didn't get into the whiskey before supper. She knew that the Cotter family always came with 3 more people than they said they would, and you had to plan for that. She knew that Nathan's father had started the feast as a way of cementing relationships after a difficult year, and that there was something in the tone of it, generous without being showy, communal without being sentimental, that had to be maintained or it became something else. Eliza listened to all of it. She asked questions. She amended the menu twice based on what Margaret told her. By the end of the 2 hours, they had a plan. It was not a perfect plan, and neither of them was completely satisfied with all of it, which Eliza thought was probably the right outcome. "You're going to need someone who knows pastry better than I do," Margaret said when they were finishing. "For the apple tarts. Clara made them herself, but there's a particular technique." "Can you make them?" Eliza said. A pause. "Yes," Margaret said. "I watched Clara make them enough times." "Then that's yours," Eliza said. "The tarts are yours." Margaret looked at her. "This is your house too," Eliza said. "It's your family too. I'm not running you out of it." Something crossed Margaret's face that was close to what Eliza would have called grief if she'd been pressed to name it. The particular grief of someone who has been braced against a blow that didn't come. "Clara would have liked you," Margaret said. It seemed to cost her something to say it. She didn't tolerate foolishness, and she could smell dishonesty from 30 feet. She would have tested you thoroughly. A pause. "But she would have liked you." Eliza looked at the table. "That means something," she said, and she meant it. The week before the feast was the hardest and the most alive she'd felt since coming to the Cole Ranch. She was up at 4 every morning, working through the preparations in stages. The things that could be made ahead and the things that couldn't. The logistics of a kitchen that had to produce food for 60-plus people without losing control of the sequence. She pulled in Walt to help with the heavier lifting and the fire management. She put Caleb to work splitting additional wood, which he did without complaint. He'd been doing more without complaint lately, a gradual shift she'd watched without drawing attention to. Lily was in the kitchen every morning before sunup. She was not in the way. She had an instinct for what was helpful and what wasn't, which was unusual in a 7-year-old, and she applied it. She peeled things when asked. She stirred things when asked. She stayed out of the high-traffic parts of the kitchen during the rush and found herself useful in the quieter corners. 3 days before the feast, she asked if she could help make the apple cake. Eliza had been planning to make it anyway, a larger version adjusted for the scale of the event, and she had been wondering how to ask Lily without making it a larger moment than it could safely be. She hadn't needed to wonder. "You'll need to stand on the stool," Eliza said. Lily got the stool. They made the cake together, Eliza directing, Lily executing with a seriousness that was almost funny, and also, in the way of things that were funny and painful at the same time, not funny at all. She measured the sugar with a level hand. She peeled the apples, Gravensteins Nathan had ridden into town specifically for them, with concentration so fierce her tongue pressed against her teeth. When it came time to press the crust into the pan, Eliza guided her hands. Lily's small fingers worked the dough into the edges. She looked up once and saw Eliza's scarred hands beside hers, and she looked at them without the look adults gave them, without assessment or discomfort, just a child's straightforward acceptance of what hands looked like. "Did it hurt a lot?" she said. "Yes," Eliza said. "For a long time?" "For a while," Eliza said. "It doesn't hurt that way anymore." Lily looked back at the pan. She pressed the crust carefully into the corner. "I had a place that hurt for a long time," she said. "Inside." Eliza kept her breathing steady. "I know," she said. "It's smaller now," Lily said. "It's still there, but it's smaller." She said it the way children sometimes said the truest things. Not as a confession, not looking for a response, just as a fact she was reporting, accurate and simple. "That's how it goes," Eliza said. "Smaller, not gone, just smaller, and you get bigger around it." Lily nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd been working out. They left the edges of the crust the way Eliza always left them. Loose, irregular, pulled up so the filling would caramelize and catch, and go slightly dark in the corners. They slid the pan into the oven, and Lily sat on the stool and watched the oven door. "She's going to be there," Lily said. "At the feast, isn't she?" Eliza understood she didn't mean Margaret. "She'll be in what you made," Eliza said. "In the cake. She'll be in what your pa remembers. She'll be in how your brother looks out for you when there's too many people around, because she raised him to do that. Lily was quiet for a moment. Is that enough? She said. Eliza looked at her. The girl's eyes were serious and dry. She wasn't asking permission to cry. She was asking a real question, the kind of question that deserved a real answer. It has to be, Eliza said honestly. I wish I could tell you different. Lily looked at the oven door. Okay, she said. The smell of the cake began to fill the kitchen, warm and sweet and slightly smoky from the edges catching right, and it moved through the house the way good smells do. Quietly, into every corner, settling into the walls, becoming for a little while the whole character of the place. Nathan appeared in the kitchen doorway. He stopped when he smelled it. His face did what it did. That involuntary thing, the sudden loosening. And then he composed it again. But Eliza had seen it, and Lily had too. And Lily looked up at her father with the first fully open expression Eliza had seen on her face since arriving. We burned the edges, Lily said. Nathan looked at his daughter. He cleared his throat. Good, he said. His voice was not quite steady. That's the right way. Lily turned back to the oven. Nathan stood in the doorway for a moment longer, and Eliza felt his eyes on the side of her face, and she did not turn to look at him because some moments were not hers to claim. They belonged to the space between a father and his daughter, and the right thing to do was to be useful in them without making them about herself. So she turned back to the counter and started on the next thing, and the cake baked, and the house smelled like something real, and outside the sun was making its way down toward the tree line that marked the edge of the coal land. The feast was 3 days away, and in the kitchen of the richest ranch in the territory, the woman everyone had judged was only just beginning to show them what her hands could do. The morning of the feast, Eliza burned her arm. Not badly. Not the way her hands had been burned, nothing that would leave more than a day's redness. But the edge of the roasting pan caught her forearm when she was pulling it from the oven at 5 in the morning, and she hissed through her teeth and set the pan down hard on the work table and stood there for a moment with her arm pressed against her apron. Walt was in the kitchen doorway in under a minute. He'd been up since 4, stoking the outdoor fire pit they'd built 3 days ago for the overflow cooking, and he'd heard the sound of the pan. Bad? He said. No, she said. She pulled her apron back and looked at it. A red stripe, 2 inches, already starting to fade at the edges. I'll live. There's cold water at the pump. I know where the pump is, Walt. He came in anyway and poured cold water from the pitcher into a cloth and handed it to her without comment. She held it against her arm and went back to monitoring the roasting pan with her other hand because the venison inside it had been going since 2 in the morning and was at the stage where it needed watching. You need to slow down, he said. I need to get the bread started, she said. The bread can wait 10 minutes. The bread cannot wait 10 minutes. It needs to be in the first rise by 6, or it won't be ready when people start arriving. She lifted the cloth, decided the arm was fine, and set the cloth aside. What I need is for the second fire pit to be at the right temperature in the next hour. Can you do that? He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who had something else to say and was making the practical calculation that now was not the time to say it. I can do that, he said, and went back outside. She started the bread. The house was quiet around her in a way it wouldn't be in 4 hours. And she moved through the kitchen with the internal map she'd built over the past weeks. What was where? What the range would do at which point of the fire? Which shelf was slightly unlevel and would cause a jar to slide if she wasn't careful? She had learned this kitchen the way you learn a difficult person, slowly, with attention, until its particular character became a working knowledge rather than a constant negotiation. Margaret appeared at 5:30. She was dressed and ready, her hair pinned, carrying her own apron. Not the kitchen apron from the hook, but a personal one she'd brought from her room, which told Eliza something about how Margaret was framing today. She came in, assessed what had been started, and without a word went to the pantry and began pulling the supplies for the apple tarts. They worked alongside each other without speaking for a while. The kitchen filled with the smell of the bread starting and the venison and the wood smoke from outside coming in under the door, and it was not comfortable exactly. There was still a watchfulness between them, a careful, not quite ease, but it was functional, and that was what mattered this morning. The Hadley family arrives early, Margaret said, without looking up from the pastry she was working. Eleanor Hadley will come straight to the kitchen to offer help. She always does. She's not actually helpful in a working kitchen, but she means well, and you need to find her something that keeps her out of the way without making her feel useless. Can she shell peas? Eliza said. She can shell peas for 2 hours and feel she's contributed, Margaret said. Yes. Good. A pause. Margaret worked the pastry. Gerald Pratt was invited, she said, by his own assumption. He wrote to Nathan last week saying he'd be attending. Eliza stopped what she was doing for a fraction of a second. Then she continued. Did Nathan respond? He told him the event was for neighboring ranch families and their workers, Margaret said. Pratt is neither. Did Pratt accept that? Margaret's mouth tightened. He wrote back and said he looked forward to seeing Nathan at the gathering. She paused. He's coming. Eliza said nothing for a moment. She thought about the papers on Nathan's desk, about the legal gaps in the Eastern Section's acquisition history, about the way Pratt had sat at their supper table and assessed everything while seeming to do nothing of the sort. Where's Nathan? She said. He was in the study when I came down. Eliza wiped her hands on her apron and left the kitchen. Nathan was at his desk with 2 letters in front of him, both of which she suspected were from Deakins and Pratt, respectively, based on the particular quality of his expression. A man caught between a problem that was being solved slowly and a problem that was moving faster than the solution. He's coming, she said. Yes, Nathan said. What do you want to do? He turned in his chair and looked at her. He'd been up since before she'd heard him moving through the house at 4, the particular footfall of a man who hasn't slept and has given up pretending he might. Deacon sent the corrected survey documentation yesterday, he said. It's filed. The Eastern Section's acquisition is clean now. Whatever Pratt thought he had, he doesn't have it. Does Pratt know that? He will when he tries to use it, Nathan said. There was something in his voice, not anger exactly, more the flat hardness of a man who has been pushed and has gotten himself into the correct position and is now entirely willing to be pushed again. Let him come. She looked at him. He looked steadier than she'd seen him look in the weeks she'd been here. Not relaxed. This was not a relaxed situation, but settled, which was different. All right, she said, then let him come. She went back to the kitchen. The guests began arriving at midday. They came in wagons and on horseback, in family groups and in pairs, the neighboring ranchers and their families, the workers from the various spreads, the 2 shopkeepers from Red Hollow who had been attending this feast since Nathan's father's time. They came with the slight formality of people who had put on their good clothes for the occasion and were aware of it. Eliza stayed in the kitchen. She had made this choice deliberately. The feast was not a performance. Not for her, not today. Today was about the food and the family and the gathering, and the best thing she could contribute was to stay in the kitchen and make sure everything that left it was exactly right. She heard the voices accumulating in the yard, and then on the porch, and then inside the house. The particular swell of a gathering that has reached the size where individual conversations blur into a general sound. She heard Nathan's voice moving through it, louder than usual, the social voice he put on, which was not false, but was a particular register he used for these occasions. She heard Lily's voice too, once, answering a question from someone. Clear and direct, the way Lily spoke, without her usual retreat into quiet. Caleb was handling the horses with Walt, which was a job he'd asked for himself. He was good with horses in the instinctive way of boys who have grown up around them, and the work gave him a role and a reason to move between the guests without having to be social in the way he found difficult. Margaret was moving between the kitchen and the gathering, the connective tissue she'd always been, bringing things out, directing people to the right places, providing the social knowledge Eliza had said she had, and was, in fact, deploying with the practiced ease of a woman who had done this for 15 years. Eleanor Hadley arrived at the kitchen door at 12:30 with her offer to help, and was installed at the end of the work table with a bowl of peas before she'd finished the sentence. The afternoon built. Eliza worked the kitchen like a conductor works an orchestra, not producing any single sound herself, but holding the shape of all of them, knowing what was coming next, making the adjustment before the problem happened, rather than after. The bread came out right. The venison came off the fire at the correct moment, rested the correct amount of time, and was carved by a hand she directed without appearing to direct. The side dishes came together in the sequence she'd planned, and when one of the pans developed a problem with the heat distribution, she caught it and corrected it, and nobody who was not in the kitchen knew there had been a problem. Gerald Pratt arrived at 2. She knew because she heard the change in the quality of the noise outside. Not dramatic, but perceptible to a person who had been listening to it for 2 hours. A slight shift, the way a room changes when someone enters who has come with an agenda. She stayed in the kitchen. She heard Nathan's voice, and then Pratt's, that warm, caring voice of a man performing sociability for an audience. And she heard them move together through the gathering. She kept working. The feast would be laid out in an hour. She needed the apple cake from the warming shelf, the tarts that Margaret had made and which were, she had to admit, very good, the relish from the cold pantry, the bread cut and arranged. It was when she was carrying the bread to the table that she first saw Pratt clearly. He was standing with a group of 3 ranchers at the far end of the gathering, talking with the ease of a man who was born to stand in groups and have people lean slightly toward him. He was dressed better than anyone else present, which was a choice that either said he hadn't understood the register of the event, or more likely, said he had understood it perfectly and wanted to stand out. He saw her at the same moment. His eyes moved to her hands, then to her face. And he smiled, the same smile from the supper table, the one that was designed somewhere else and placed carefully. She carried the bread to the table and went back to the kitchen. The meal was laid at 4. The tables had been set up in the yard, which was how it had apparently always been done. The outdoor tables ran long, and the lanterns were hung from the lines strung between the posts. And when the afternoon light started to shift toward evening, the combination was something that stopped people mid-conversation and made them look at it. Eliza came out of the kitchen when everything was set. She had been in there since 5 in the morning. She was tired in a physical way that she'd handle later. Her feet and her back had been informing her of their opinions for the last 2 hours. But she also felt the particular clear-headedness that came from having done a thing well, the uncomplicated satisfaction of work that had gone the way it was supposed to. She stood at the edge of the gathering and looked at the tables, 63 people, by her count. The food was on the tables, and it was right. Not fancy, not the kind of food that was performing sophistication, but the kind that was performing something more fundamental. The venison, the bread, the beans cooked slow with salt pork, the apple cake in 2 large versions at either end of the table, the relish, the tarts in a row along the center, the coffee, which was strong and hot, because weak coffee was still dishonest. Nathan was standing with a group of men near the head table. He saw her come out of the kitchen and something crossed his face. Relief, she thought, partly, and something else she didn't entirely know what to do with. He excused himself from the group and came to her. "It's good," he said. He meant the food, the tables, the whole of it. "It's done," she said. "That's what matters right now." He looked at her for a moment. "You've been in that kitchen since before I was awake. The bread needed to be started early." Eliza. He said her name the way he sometimes said it when he wanted her to stop deflecting and receive what he was trying to say. "Thank you." She looked back at the tables. "Thank Margaret, too," she said. "The tarts are hers." "I will," he said. A pause. "Pratt's been working the room. I saw him arrive. He's been talking to the Garfield family. They've got the spread east of the creek, about 3 miles. I think he's been at them, too." "Are they selling?" "I don't know." His voice had the tightness of a man trying to hold 2 things at once. The host who needed to be present for this gathering and the property owner who was watching a threat move through his guests. "I need to speak with them, but Pratt hasn't left their side." She thought about it. "I'll send Margaret with the tarts," she said. "She knows the Garfield family better than anyone here. She'll give you 10 minutes. He looked at her. "Go eat something first," she said. "You look like a man who's been awake since 4. He almost smiled. "I have been awake since 4. "Go eat," she said. He went. Eliza found Margaret and told her about the Garfields, and Margaret took a tray of tarts and moved toward that side of the gathering with the precision of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing, because she did. Pratt glanced up when Margaret arrived in the Garfield group. Eliza watched from the kitchen doorway as he assessed the social dynamic, calculated what he could do with it, and calculated that in this context, with a family he was still working on, creating a scene was not in his interest. He excused himself with a smile and moved away. Nathan stepped in. Eliza went back to making sure the coffee was replenished. It was Walt who came to her an hour later, When the meal was fully underway, and the yard had taken on the particular warm chaos of 60 people well-fed and talking. "Pratt's asking questions," he said quietly. He'd come to the side of the kitchen porch where she was standing, not inside, not visible to the gathering. "About what?" "About you," Walt said. "About where you came from. He's been talking to the women from Red Hollow, the ones who were at the stage when you arrived." He paused. "He found out about your hands." "Everyone knows about my hands," she said. "He knows how you got them," Walt said. She went still. Walt looked at her steadily. "He talked to someone who knew someone from Drover County," he said. "Where you were before." She looked out at the gathering. She found Pratt without difficulty. He was near the dessert table now, talking with a cluster of people that included the wife of one of the larger ranchers, a woman named Vera Cotton, whose opinion, apparently, carried weight in the territory. "What's he saying?" she said. Her voice was even. She had practiced being even-voiced about this for years, and she was good at it. "I don't know all of it," Walt said. But there was a word being used. She looked at him. "Reckless," he said. She absorbed that. She understood immediately what Pratt was doing. Not just what, but why. A direct attack on her character did nothing for his land ambitions, but an attack that undermined Nathan's judgment, that made the assembled guests question whether Nathan Cole was making sound decisions, whether the man who had inexplicably brought a scarred outsider into the most respected ranch in the territory was perhaps not the steady hand they'd assumed. That did something. That created a crack. "All right," she said. "You want me to—" "No," she said. "Stay out of it." She went inside, through the kitchen, and stood at the work table for a moment. She thought about walking out there and addressing it directly. She had the words. She had carried this story for years, and she knew its shape, and she could tell it in a way that would cut Pratt's version off at the root. But she also knew what happened when a woman stood up in a gathering and defended herself. What she said was the second thing people remembered. The fact that she'd had to say it was the first. She thought about staying in the kitchen and letting it run. Pratt would work through the gathering, and some people would believe what he said, and some wouldn't, and over time it would probably find its own level. That was what she usually did. She had been doing that her whole life. She thought about Nathan. She took off her kitchen apron and hung it on the hook. She went out to the gathering. She didn't go toward Pratt. She went toward Vera Cotton, because that was where Pratt had been. And because if there was a current running through this gathering, it was running through Vera Cotton and the cluster of women around her. Vera Cotton was a tall woman in her 60s, with the particular authority of someone who had been considered formidable for long enough that they'd stopped having to work at it. She looked at Eliza when she approached with an expression that was assessing but not unkind, the face of a woman deciding whether what she'd heard matched what she saw. Eliza met her eyes. "Mrs. Cotton," she said, "I understand Gerald Pratt has been telling people how I burned my hands." A slight shift in the group. The social adjustment of people who had been caught mid-conversation about a subject and now had to decide how to handle the person the conversation was about. Vera Cotton said, "He did mention it." "He said reckless," Eliza said. A pause. "Something like that," Vera Cotton said. She was not going to lie about it, which Eliza respected. "My employer's house caught fire at night," Eliza said. "I was staying in the East Wing. There was a child in the kitchen, the cook's daughter, 4 years old. She'd gotten up in the night and gone to find her mother, and the fire cut off the hallway. She said it plainly, no performance, the way she'd told it a handful of times in her life when she'd had to. I went through the kitchen. The child was under the table. I got her out." Nobody spoke. "The doctor told me afterward that the damage to my hands was because I was moving things, the burning things, the fallen things, to get to her. Said if I'd been reckless, I would have panicked and gone the wrong way." She stopped. "Gerald Pratt has never met me before the week he sat at my husband's table and tried to get him to sign papers that would have cost him the Eastern grazing section at less than half its value." The silence in the immediate group had a quality now. Not the silence of people who didn't know what to think, but the silence of people who were revising something. Vera Cotton looked at her for a long moment. "Mr. Pratt told it differently," she said. "I imagine he did," Eliza said. "He had a reason to." Another silence. Then Vera Cotton said very precisely, "My late husband had dealings with Mr. Pratt some years ago that he later regretted." She paused. "I should have said something when I saw him here. It wasn't an apology. It was something more useful, a correction of position, delivered in a register that the assembled women understood perfectly. Eliza nodded once and turned to go. "Mrs. Cole," said Vera Cotton. Eliza stopped. "The venison is excellent," Vera Cotton said. "The bread particularly." Eliza looked at her. "Thank you," she said. She moved back through the gathering. She found Nathan near the edge of the yard, talking with the Garfield family, and she caught his eye and gave him a small nod that meant she had handled something and it was handled. He held her look for a beat longer than necessary, the particular attention of a man who understood that something had just happened and was trying to read the shape of it. She kept moving. What she had not expected was Pratt. He was waiting at the edge of the tables, and he had clearly tracked her through the gathering, and when she came close enough he stepped into her path with the calm confidence of a man who had never fully registered that a situation had turned against him. "Mrs. Cole," he said, the warm smile. "I feel we got off on the wrong foot." "I don't think we did," she said. "I think we got on the exact foot we were always going to be on." The smile didn't waver. "I've heard you're an impressive woman," he said. "A resourceful woman. The kind of woman who understands how things work." A pause. "I wonder if you might help me understand Nathan's thinking on the eastern section. He's not selling," Eliza said. "These things can change." "Not this one," she said. "The survey documentation was corrected last week. The acquisition history is clean. Deacons filed it in Mill Haven." She watched his face. The smile stayed, but something behind it shifted, recalculated. "Whatever you thought you had, Mr. Pratt, you don't have it." He looked at her. The smile, for the first time, showed some effort. "You've been busy," he said. "I've been doing my job," she said. "And what job is that exactly?" The warmth in his voice had thinned out. Not threatening. He was too calculated for that, in a public setting, but thinner. "You're a ranch wife." "Yes," she said. "I am." She walked past him. She heard him behind her, once. Not a sound exactly, more the sense of a man recalibrating, weighing his remaining options. She didn't look back. It was Nathan who came to find her 10 minutes later, which meant someone had told him about the conversation, which meant probably Walt, who she would talk to later about being more subtle. "What did he say to you?" Nathan said. They were at the edge of the gathering, slightly apart from the nearest group. "Nothing that mattered," she said. "Eliza." "He tried to get information about the eastern section," she said. "I told him the documentation was filed. He knows he's done." Nathan looked at her steadily. "He said something before that. I could see it in how you were standing." She looked back at the gathering. The lanterns had come on in the last half hour as the light dropped, and the yard had that particular quality of lantern-lit evenings. Everything slightly golden, slightly softened, the kind of lighting that made people feel, for a moment, that things were simpler than they were. "He said ranch wife like it was a diminishment," she said. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I handled it," she said. "I know you did," he said. Something in his voice had changed register. "I know you did, and Eliza, I heard what you told Vera Cotton, about your hands, about the fire." He stopped, tried again. "I didn't know the whole of it. I knew there'd been a fire, I knew, but I didn't know about the child." "I don't tell it often," she said. "Why not? He stopped again, and she could see him working on it, this man who was not easy with certain kinds of expression, trying to find the words for something he hadn't needed words for before. "People look at your hands and they see damage," he said, "and the truth is the opposite of that. It's the opposite of damage." She looked at him. "You should have told people sooner," he said, "before Pratt could—" "Nathan," she said, "I don't tell it because it's mine. I don't owe people my worst moments as explanation for my existence." A pause. "I told it tonight because Pratt was using the silence for something, and I decided it wasn't worth the silence anymore. That was my choice, not his." He held her eyes. "That's fair," he said. "I know it is," she said. They stood there for a moment. Around them the gathering moved and talked and ate the last of the apple cake and drank the coffee, and the night came down around the lanterns and made everything in its circle warm and close. "He's leaving," Nathan said. She turned and saw Pratt moving toward the horses, his departure carrying the particular energy of a man who has decided to cut his losses before they compound. Walt was watching him go with an expression of satisfaction He wasn't trying very hard to conceal. "Good," she said. "He'll be back eventually," Nathan said. "Not here, but in the territory." "Other people's problem," she said. "You're clean." He nodded. He looked at his boots for a moment, then back at the gathering. "Lily's been sitting at the table for 2 hours," he said. "She ate." His voice had shifted again, gone somewhere quieter. "She finished a whole plate. Margaret was trying not to cry about it for the last hour." Eliza looked toward the tables. She found Lily at the far end, sitting between two children she recognized as belonging to the Garfield family, talking, actually talking, her hands moving the way they did when she was explaining something she cared about. She looked back at the yard. The light, the gathering, the lanterns. The apple cake, mostly gone now, the burned corner pieces taken first. The bread that was down to crumbs. The coffee that had been replenished twice. Caleb appeared at her elbow, which startled her slightly because she hadn't heard him come up. "Walt says Pratt left," he said. "He did," she said. "Good." He said it with the flatness of a 14-year-old who had understood more of the situation than anyone had told him directly, because 14-year-olds always understood more than they were told. He looked at the gathering. "The food was good," he said. Coming from Caleb, that was a speech. "I had help," she said. He nodded, accepting that, and moved away toward the horses where he was evidently more comfortable. And she watched him go and thought about the boy who had stood in a kitchen doorway on her first day and given her a greeting with no inflection in it, and thought about the distance between that boy and this one. Not resolved, not fixed. She was not naive about the work that was still ahead. The grief that didn't disappear on a good evening, but only got slightly quieter, slightly more manageable. She knew Lily would have harder days ahead. She knew Caleb was 14, and 14 was its own kind of long road. She knew Margaret would still sometimes appear in the kitchen with an expression that meant she was working something out, and that Nathan was still a man who found certain things easier to manage from the east pasture than to address directly. She knew all of that. But she also stood at the edge of the lantern light and looked at what the day had made. The 63 people in her yard, the food she had built from a cold kitchen and an early morning, and her own 2 damaged hands. The child at the far table who was talking to other children for the first time in she didn't know how long, and she let herself, just for a moment, stand in it. Nathan appeared at her side again. He'd gotten himself a piece of the apple cake, the last piece, which turned out to be a corner piece. He ate it and didn't say anything for a while. "Burned edges and all?" he said. "That's the right way," she said. He looked at her sideways, a long look, the kind he'd been giving her with increasing frequency that she'd been cataloging and not yet deciding what to do with. She looked back at the gathering. "Go be with your guests," she said. "In a minute," he said. He stayed where he was, and for a minute, and then a little longer than a minute, they stood together at the edge of the light while the feast went on around them and the lanterns held off the dark and the burned edges of the apple cake turned out, as they always did, to be exactly the right thing. The morning after the feast, the yard looked like what it was. A place where 63 people had eaten and talked and stayed too long in a good way. Eliza was out there at first light with a bucket and a rag, which was where Nathan found her when he came down at 6, and he stood on the porch for a moment looking at her before he came out to help. He didn't ask if she needed help. He just picked up the other bucket. They cleaned the yard together in the early quiet, the way they'd worked in the kitchen garden that first time, without much talking, falling into a practical rhythm that had become, over the weeks, one of the things she trusted about him. He was a man who showed up for the work. That was not a small thing. She had known men who were generous with words and scarce with presence, and she had known which kind she could build something with. Walt arrived an hour later and took over the heavier work, and Eliza went inside to start breakfast, and the day began its ordinary shape. And it was the ordinariness of it, after the event of the day before, that felt like something. Margaret was in the kitchen already. Not running it. She was sitting at the work table with a cup of coffee, which was different from her usual managed purposefulness. She looked like a woman who had slept well for the first time in a while and hadn't quite decided what to do with that. "The tarts were the best thing on the table," Eliza said, because it was true, and because Margaret needed to hear it stated plainly. "They always were," Margaret said, and then, slightly less comfortably, "Clara let me make them every year. Said they were better than hers." She turned the cup in her hands. I think she was being kind, but maybe not entirely. Probably not entirely, Eliza said. Margaret looked at her. Something moved across her face that was complicated and human and not completely resolved. Grief and relief, and the particular exhaustion of someone who had been holding a position for so long they'd forgotten they were holding it and had finally, in some small degree, let it go. I owe you an honest thing, Margaret said. Eliza got the bread started and waited. When you came, Margaret said, I decided you were temporary. I decided Nathan had made a panicked decision and it would run its course and I would manage through it. She paused. I was unkind to you in ways that I told myself were practical. I know, Eliza said. I'm not asking you to say it's all right. Good, Eliza said, because some of it wasn't. A silence. But some of it was just two people in a hard situation with no clear lines, Eliza said, and I wasn't without fault in that either. Margaret nodded. She was not a woman who accepted grace easily. She received it the way people do who have spent too long believing they have to earn everything, with a slight stiffness, a reluctance to take what was offered at full face value. But she received it. I'd like to stay, she said. Here. With the family, if you're willing to have me. Eliza turned from the range. This is your family too, she said. I've said that before. You've said it, Margaret said. I'm asking if you mean it. Eliza held her eyes. Yes, she said. I mean it. Margaret nodded once, picked up her cup, and went to help with the bread without being asked. It was not a dramatic reconciliation. It did not erase the first weeks or the cold plates or the territorial maneuvering over the kitchen accounts. But it was real, which was more durable than dramatic, and they both knew the difference. Lily came down at 6:30 with her hair already braided, which was new. She'd been wearing it loose since Eliza had arrived. The particular untended look of a child who had lost the person who usually did her hair and hadn't asked anyone else to. You did your own hair, Eliza said. Margaret showed me last night, Lily said. She touched the braid self-consciously. It's not very straight. It's fine, Eliza said. The left side is looser than the right. Nobody's going to be measuring it, Eliza said. Lily accepted this and climbed onto her stool. She had a quality this morning that was different from the watchful quietness Eliza had first seen in her. Not loud, she was still Lily, still fundamentally a child who took things seriously and thought before she spoke, but open in a way she hadn't been, as if something had been unlatched. The girl from the Garfield family, she said. Her name is Ruth. She's 8. She said I could visit their ranch. Do you want to? Eliza said. Lily considered it with her usual thoroughness. I think so, she said. She knows how to fish. That's a useful skill, Eliza said. Do you know how to fish? Badly, Eliza said. Lily looked at her with the expression she reserved for information that required filing away carefully. I could teach you, she said. When I learn. That sounds like a fair arrangement, Eliza said. Caleb appeared in the doorway, which was becoming a household pattern, the men of the Cole family appearing in kitchen doorways, drawn by smell and warmth and a reluctance to announce themselves that Eliza had stopped trying to address directly. He was wearing his good shirt, which was not a school day and not a church day, which meant something else. Walt said he'd taken me to look at that horse, he said. To Eliza specifically, which was also new. The roan at the Garfield spread. Nathan said I could go. Then go, she said. He nodded. He started to leave, then stopped. The food was good yesterday, he said. Better than good. It was the same thing he'd said the night before, almost word for word, which meant it was not a social formula, but an actual thing he'd chosen to say twice because he meant it and hadn't found a better way to say it. Come back before dark, she said. He left, and she heard him and Walt in the yard, and Lily watched the window with the alert interest of someone noting that her brother had a place to go and that this was worth recording. The day after the feast was a Thursday, and by the following Monday the territory had processed what had happened at the Cole Ranch in the way of small communities. Not all at once, but in pieces, through conversations and secondhand accounts, and the particular efficiency of women who had been at the gathering talking to women who hadn't. The story of what Eliza had said to Vera Cotton traveled farther and faster than Eliza had intended. She had not told it as a story. She had told it as a correction, a fact that needed to be in the room. But facts have a way of becoming stories when they're the right shape, and this one was the right shape. By the following week, people in Red Hollow knew that the scarred woman at the Cole Ranch had gotten those scars pulling a child out of a burning building, and that Gerald Pratt had tried to tell it differently for reasons of his own, and that Vera Cotton had revised her opinion on the spot. Vera Cotton's opinions did not revise easily. That part of the story traveled farthest. Pratt did not come back. Deacon sent a note to Nathan 2 weeks after the feast, saying that Pratt had moved his operations south, toward the lower territory, where presumably he had identified easier prospects. Nathan read the note at the breakfast table and set it down and drank his coffee and didn't say much about it. What he said, later, to Eliza, was, "I should have caught that myself. The documentation, the papers, I should have been paying attention." "You were paying attention to other things," she said. "That's the excuse again," he said. "No," she said. "It's the truth. You can hold both. The truth that you let things go, and the truth that you had a reason." He looked at her. He did that more now, looked at her in a considering way, like a man who had found something unexpected in a place he thought he knew, and was still in the process of understanding it. "You're very direct," he said. "Yes," she said. "Most people aren't. Most people are afraid of what happens when they are," she said. "I've already had the hard things happen. It makes you less afraid of the words." He thought about that for a while. The weeks after the feast brought a change in the quality of things that was hard to name precisely because it wasn't one change, but many small ones, and small changes are easy to miss when you're inside them. Lily started eating properly. Not all at once. There were still meals where she picked at things, still days where the grief found her in unexpected moments, and she went quiet in a particular way that Eliza recognized and no longer tried to fix with food or conversation. But the physical deterioration had reversed, and she was growing again in that sudden way of children who have started eating enough, and the color was back in her face. She was in the kitchen most mornings before anyone else was up. She had graduated from watching to participating, not just carrying plates, but stirring things, measuring things, asking questions that were specific and practical and showed she had been paying attention for weeks before she asked. "Why do you add the salt before the water boils?" she said one morning, watching Eliza make beans. "You get a better texture," Eliza said. "Salt early. The beans hold their shape better." "But some people say you wait until they're soft." Eliza looked at her. "Where did you hear that?" "Margaret," Lily said. "Margaret and I disagree on the beans," Eliza said. "I'm right, but that's not something you need to repeat." Lily's face did something that was almost a smirk. "What if I ask Margaret why she adds it after?" "You can ask her," Eliza said. "She'll have a reason. It'll be the wrong reason, but she'll have it." The smirk completed itself. It was a real one, the expression of a child who had found the particular pleasure of adults disagreeing about something specific and comprehensible, which was so much easier to navigate than the large, shapeless things they usually disagreed about. Eliza was chopping carrots and not looking at her, so Lily couldn't see what her face did in return. Caleb came back from the Garfield spread talking about the roan horse for 3 days, which was more consecutive talking than he had done since Eliza had arrived, and Nathan sat at the supper table and listened with the expression of a man who was hearing his son's voice in a way he hadn't in a long time and was being careful not to react in a way that would stop it. He managed it. It was a near thing, once or twice. She could see him wanting to say more, wanting to respond with too much warmth, and she watched him pull it back and find the quieter register that Caleb could hear without flinching. He was learning. He was a slow learner in this particular area, but he was learning. She told him so, one evening when they were on the porch. They'd taken to sitting there in the evening sometimes, not every night, but on the nights when the work was done and the children were inside and the darkness had the quality of something that could be sat in comfortably. "You pulled back at supper," she said, "when he was talking about the horse. That was the right call." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I wanted to tell him we'd go look at it together," he said. "I almost said it." "You can tell him that tomorrow," she said. "One thing at a time with Caleb." "Is that how you did it?" he said. "With him? With Lily?" "I didn't do anything," she said. "I just tried not to take up more space than I was given and let them decide how much space to give me." He turned and looked at her in the low light. "That's not nothing," he said. "That's harder than most things." She looked out at the dark yard. The horses had gone quiet in the corral. Somewhere distant, something called once and stopped. "I want to tell you something," Nathan said. She waited. When I arranged this, when I wrote those letters, made this arrangement, I was doing it because I was drowning, he said. I need you to know that. I wasn't thinking about you. I was thinking about the children and the ranch and the fact that I couldn't hold all of it anymore. And I thought, he stopped. I thought a practical arrangement would solve a practical problem. I knew that, she said. I know you knew it, he said. I'm telling you that it changed, that it's not that anymore for me, that I'm aware it may not be, that you may have come here for practical reasons too, and that's yours to hold. I'm not asking you to. He stopped again. He was a man who was better at most things than he was at this, and he knew it, and that knowledge was audible in the way he stumbled over the sentence. She let him stumble. She did not rescue him from it because he needed to get to the end of it himself. I just want you to know what it is, he said, for me, whatever you do with that. She sat with it for a moment. The honest answer was complicated, and she owed him the complicated version, not the clean one. I came here because I was tired, she said. I'd been moving my whole life, from one place to the next, one job to the next. I was tired, and someone told me you were decent, and I thought decent might be enough to build something with. She paused. It turned out you were more than decent, that I didn't plan for. He was very still. I'm not good at this either, she said. I want you to know that. I'm not someone who... I don't find it easy to let things matter. I've let things matter before and lost them, and every time it was harder to start again. She looked at her hands in her lap, the familiar landscape of them. But this mattered before I knew it was going to. The children. This house. You. She said the last word plainly, because she had decided that plainness was what he deserved and what she could give without hedging it into something smaller than it was. I don't know what that means yet, completely, but I wanted you to know it's there. The night was very quiet. Nathan reached over and put his hand over hers. Both of them, his large working hand covering her damaged ones, not flinching from the texture of the scars, just resting there. They sat like that for a while without talking. It was not a resolution, not in the clean sense. They were still two people who had come together under practical circumstances, and were making something real out of it a day at a time, which was the only way real things got made. He would still sometimes handle conflict by finding urgent business elsewhere. She would still sometimes hold things too close and not say them until she'd carried them too long. There were miles of road ahead, and some of it was going to be rough. But she felt the weight of his hand over hers, and she thought about the kitchen in the early morning and the girl standing on a stool to help with the crust, and the boy in the doorway saying the food was good twice because once wasn't enough to say it right. And she thought about Margaret's apple tarts and Walt's gray-edged beard and the roan horse that Caleb was going to talk about for another week at least. She thought about what it meant to build something, not to find something whole and walk into it, but to start with pieces, broken-edged and mismatched, and work them into a shape that holds. That was what she'd been doing her whole life, in one form or another. She just hadn't done it in a place she wanted to stay before. Winter came on hard that year, the way winters did in the high territory. Not gradually, but in one committed drop that turned everything stark and made the ranch a world of its own. The kitchen was warm. It was always warm now, and not just from the range. The particular warmth of a space that was used fully, that had purpose and people in it, that had been cared for and had responded to caring the way most neglected things do when you give them enough time and attention. Lily had her own section of the work table. This had evolved without ceremony. She had simply begun, over weeks, to leave her things there. The small rolling pin Eliza had found in the back pantry and given her, the notebook where she wrote down recipes in a handwriting that was improving, the particular cloth she used for dusting flour. Nobody had designated it hers. It had become hers, the way things become yours when you tend them. On a Sunday in December, 3 months after Eliza had climbed down from the stage in Red Hollow with one bag and 2 damaged hands, and the scrutiny of a town that had already decided what she was, she made the apple cake again. Lily helped. She stood on the stool and put the apples in the pan and helped measure the nutmeg and left the edges loose at the corners the way she now knew they were supposed to be left. Caleb came in while they were working and didn't leave. He sat at the table and watched in the way he watched things. The sideways attention of a boy who didn't want to be seen caring about something. And when Eliza handed him the spoon to scrape the bowl, he took it without a word and used it with complete absence of self-consciousness. Nathan stood in the doorway. He watched his 2 children in his kitchen, and his kitchen was warm, and the woman who had made it warm was standing at the range with flour on her apron and her damaged hands moving with their particular adapted efficiency, and Eliza turned and saw him there. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything either. There was nothing that needed to be said in that moment, which was itself something she had not always believed possible. That there could be enough. That enough could settle into a room and simply be itself without needing to be spoken. She turned back to the range. Lily looked up from the pan. "Are you going to burn them?" she asked, meaning the edges. "On purpose," Eliza said. Lily nodded seriously, as if confirming a principle she had learned and was now recording. "This is what I have come to understand, having lived inside stories like this one long enough to know their real shape. The world has a habit of looking at a person's wounds and calling them weaknesses. It does this efficiently, casually, as if the arithmetic were obvious, that what has been broken must be lesser, that what carries evidence of damage must be damaged still. But damage and strength are not opposites. They are sometimes the same material, the same experience, looked at from different angles. The thing that hurt you is not the same as the thing that broke you, and the difference between those two is where people live their whole lives." Eliza Voss came to Red Hollow with scarred hands and one bag, and the deep tiredness of a woman who had been surviving for so long she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to simply live. She did not come with the fantasy of transformation. She did not believe she would arrive and be loved and be healed and have everything she'd ever lacked. She came because someone told her there was a decent man in a hard situation, and she thought decent might be enough. What she found was not a rescue. She found a house full of broken things that required the same skill she had always had. The skill of looking at something that has been let go and seeing, beneath the neglect, whether the structure was still sound, whether there was something worth working with. There was. There is. There almost always is, in my experience. The question is only whether you're willing to do the work, and whether the work is yours to do. The children who grieve are not children who are lost. They are children who are waiting for something to be safe enough to return to. Lily was always in that kitchen, in some form. She just needed someone to leave the door open without making a ceremony of it. The young man who builds a wall at 14 is not a young man without feeling. He has more feeling than he knows what to do with, and the wall is the only architecture that seems stable in an unstable time. You don't tear down a wall like that. You make yourself useful near it, and you wait. And one day the person on the other side knocks from the inside. The woman who defended her territory was not a woman without love. She had more love than she'd been given room to put anywhere, and it had compressed itself into control, into management, into the performance of indispensability. What she needed was not to be defeated. She needed to be given something real to hold. And the man who ran from hard conversations to the east pasture, he was not a coward. He was a man who had built everything he knew how to build and found that none of it helped with the thing that mattered most, and the helplessness of that had calcified into avoidance. What he needed was someone who was not afraid to say the difficult thing plainly and then stay in the room afterward. None of them were fixed. They were a family in progress, which is the only kind there is. What I keep returning to when I think about stories like this is the question of what we are actually measuring when we measure a person's worth. We say we don't judge by appearances. We say we know better than to look at the surface of a thing and call it the whole. And then a woman gets off a stage in a small town with scarred hands, and we make up our minds before she's taken 3 steps. Her hands told the truth, as it turned out. They told it better than any introduction she could have made. They said, "I have been in the fire. I have stayed in it when leaving was possible. I have come out the other side carrying something that wasn't mine to carry, and I would do it again." That is not damage. That is a person you can trust. The apple cake came out of the oven on a December Sunday with the edges burned exactly as intended, and Lily took the first corner piece and bit into it standing at the counter, the way children eat when they've forgotten to be careful, the way children eat when they are, for that moment, simply hungry, and the food is there. Eliza watched her. Lily looked up with a burned sugar smear at the corner of her mouth and said, "It's good." "It's supposed to be," Eliza said. "Is it the same as before?" Lily said. "As my ma's?" "No," Eliza said. "It's mine." Lily looked at the cake. She thought about it, turning the question over the way she turned everything over. "That's okay," she said. "I like yours too." She took another bite, and Caleb reached past her for the opposite corner without asking, And Nathan stepped into the kitchen from the doorway he'd been occupying, and the kitchen was warm and small and full and imperfect and real. And outside the winter was doing what winters do, and inside the range was going. And the coal ranch on that December afternoon was exactly and only itself. Not what it had been, not what anyone had imagined it would be, but what it had become, which was enough, which was in